Today we have Keith Keating with us. Keith is a global learning strategist at GP Strategies with a career spanning over 20 years in L&D. Keith leads clients on the development and execution of their global learning strategies. He utilizes design thinking to help Fortune 500 clients tap into understanding and resolving unmet customer and employee needs with a keen passion to help them prepare for the future of work. With that short intro, very warm welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Amit. It's a pleasure to be here and always a great experience talking with you and learning from you and sharing our experience with your audience.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so happy that you could join us today. Why don't we begin with learning a little bit about yourself, your journey, and what particularly ticks you today?
Certainly. So as you mentioned, I've been in the industry for over 20 years. So if you're doing the math, I started when I was 5 years old. For me, my journey with learning has never been linear. I struggled a lot in school and even after school. And it wasn't until the beginning of my profession that I realized how important learning was for us in general. And I can say that I didn't even realize it then. It took a slow transition, gradual, to realize the importance of all of us being lifelong learners. And it started for me with my fear of losing my job and what would happen to me, the obsession around job titles. And once I realized that control over my future was really up to me, and that was around my skills, both the skills that I have, my transferable skills, and about just the concept of learning in general. It helped to free that fear from me. And so that is something that I try to help share with other talent in terms of my passion is around enabling, encouraging, and empowering talent to take control over their future, so that they don't live in fear about their job title, about technology, robotics, automation, replacing all of our jobs, because we have an innate skill set, our human skill set, that technology isn't going to take over. And so my goal is just to help keep our talent skilled, reskilled, upskilled, second skilled, any type of skilling, so that we're prepared for whatever changes are coming, so that we can continue to be employed.
Wow. Very interesting. You said that you kind of got interested in this a little more or so deeply when you were yourself fearing for your job, or you were thinking about those kind of things. And that is something that could be so relevant to a lot of people in these days, as you talked about robotics and automation being at the top of their list of things that can really scare them. So you've taken a proactive approach towards that. From that fear, you've actually converted it to a strength. That's so wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that.
And I think we want that. We want that for all of our talents.
Yeah.
Whether there's a fear or not, the moral of the story is we need to all be lifelong learners, so that we can continuously meet the needs of the changes within our industry, our organization, society in general. I think COVID has been a great example of that we've seen such a pivotal and agile shift from a number of organizations, our talent meeting those needs. And that just doesn't happen without that importance of agility. So we can really learn from the situation that we're in now, so that we can continue to be a linchpin and to fill those gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think no better time to realize that being a lifelong learner is an absolute necessity. So today, I would be very keen to merge what your passion area has been, which is design thinking, with a topic that we are exploring in more detail, in the last few months and maybe for a few more months, learning engagement. So if I were to ask you a question to begin with, which is, how do you view learning engagement? What do L&D folks not get right about it sometimes, if I were to put it, with a slight twist as well?
Learning engagement, although it has a number of different, I guess, definitions, if you will, is really about the quantity and the quality of our learners' participations in the training or the learning experience. At the end of the day, it is up to us, the L&D professionals, to really determine that amount and strength of learner engagement. I think the answer to your question is, what's one of the biggest challenges is that we don't often think about the importance of learning engagement or learner engagement. I think a number of the times we are considered to be order takers within our organization. So that means that someone else has already determined the solution before it's even come to us. We'll get a message or a request, build a 30-minute web-based training to change this behavior, build a 2-day ILT, create a job aid for me, give me some mobile learning. And we're often only given a myopic viewpoint of what that challenge is, what that behavior is that we're actually trying to solve for. And so with limited information, with already given an order for what the business is wanting, it really limits our ability to create engaging materials, engaging experiences that are truly going to change behavior or drive performance support. So the summary of that to your question is, I think the biggest challenge is because we're treated as order takers rather than trusted advisors and only given a little bit of information, not having access to the learners themselves or the larger problem or behavior that we're trying to change, we are limited in our ability to create true engagement in the learning experiences.
Sure. So I picked two big points. Of course, the number one about your own understanding and definition of learning engagement is the quality of participation. And the biggest challenge the L&D faces is being order takers and hence not being able to do proper analysis, understand the learner situations, the real challenges they are facing, and what is the real business problem we are trying to solve. And if you're not getting there, then you are essentially doing something because you've been told to, but very hard to really get learner engagement there.
Absolutely. It's like, I wouldn't walk into my doctor's office and tell him or her what my prescription is and self-diagnose and just say, hey, I need you to write me this script so I can be on my way. And that's how the business often looks at us, learning and development. And so it's part of our responsibility to help change that mind shift from being viewed as order takers to being viewed as trusted advisors, to be proactive instead of reactive, to be a forethought instead of an afterthought, so that we can create the right solutions and the engaging solutions so that learners are active in their learning. Goes back to our earlier conversation about being lifelong learners. Part of that is in the culture that we're creating, in the opportunities that we're creating for them. We want them to be eager to actually participate in their learning, their willingness to put forward the effort, their motivation, and their inspiration. And the last two, the motivation and inspiration, I find are two of the biggest gaps that we often have among our learners, especially when we are prescribing the learning to them without them having a deeper understanding of the why behind it. Why as a learner am I taking this? When I complete this, how is it going to make me a better employee, a better person? So without that motivation, that inspiration, we are really shackled with our ability to create learning engagement.
Yeah, I think relevancy is probably the number one thing. And I like that example before we get there is on the doctor side, that's a brilliant one. If you consider your doctor to be an order taker, like you treat L&D, then that's exactly what you will get, So yeah, I think if L&D can take that sort of a role of an advisor like a doctor is, I think that will be best. We end up prescribing the right solutions for the right or the type of problems we face. Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. But coming back to what you were saying about, motivation, which is and through why I need to do this, what will I be achieving? So relevancy, of course, is I take away from there is the number one thing. But you also mentioned about culture. So do you see uh, the culture itself impacting motivation and learning engagement beyond an individual learning program, or as an overarching uh, force which is really motivating people to go towards learning and engaging a little more with it?
100%. There's an older quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it's completely true. We can define whatever type of learning strategy we want to have, but if the culture doesn't support that strategy, we're not going to be successful. Or it's going to be an extreme challenge to be successful because we're also trying to change the culture at the same time, which is often the biggest gap that we don't recognize is that it's not just a strategy we're executing. We're also trying to change the culture and the mindset along the way, which is huge. A lot of heavy lifting there. So the answer to your question is yes, learning culture does completely impact whether or not we have an environment that celebrates and encourages learning. And that celebration and encouragement is going to impact that learning engagement.
All right. So one is, of course, an organization can look at, creating a culture where learning is seen as a thing that is desired and valuable, and through celebration, encouragement, maybe rewards, whatever, people may have. And also at a maybe a granular level, if you were to say, ensuring that you have motivation. Some motivation is coming from the culture side, some you are building into the programs as you work and create those programs. So where do you see utilization of, your design thinking process that you have been advocating in creating solutions for this? Is there an overlap in this? Is it part of the process that you are talking of?
So I believe that as learning development practitioners, we all need to have a toolkit. And it's our job to have the broadest toolkit with lots of tools in there, and we're experienced with them, and we use them based on the culture, based on the strategy, based on the problems that we're trying to solve for or trying to find for, the behaviors that we're trying to change. And design thinking is one of those tools that every L&D practitioner should be familiar with and have in their toolkit. That being said, it is not a tool to solve every single problem. Just like if you were trying to build a house, you wouldn't pick one tool, say the hammer, to try and build the entire house with. It is one tool that has a specific function and purpose for when it's needed. That being said, design thinking is absolutely a tool that can be used with learning engagement. So I'll share with you a little bit about our recent evolution at General Motors in the Center of Learning. And that is, when I joined the team about 4 years ago, there were two questions that I asked. And that was, the first was, how are we doing? And the answer was, we're doing great. Our level 1 surveys are great. When we have discussions with our learners in the field, they love the trainers. Everybody says that we're great. Okay, so if we're so great, could we be even better? And that's a question that I think we can always be asking in L&D or in any function within the organization is could we be better? And I share that because sometimes the data that we have may not be accurate, or the questions that we're asking may not be the right questions, or may not be all of the questions that we should be asking. And in our case, we were asking the right myopic questions that were focused on that specific learning event. And so, yes, the learners were engaged in that event, and we did have good feedback, but our questions weren't broad enough to gather what else do they need? What more could we be doing for them? What other skills do they need developed? What learning challenges do they have? And so using design thinking, we started on a continuous improvement journey, if you will, for how we could be even better. Although our data said that we were great, the answer was we could actually be better. And in our design thinking initiative, so the first phase, 5 phases: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And we start with first empathy. We don't start with a problem statement. We don't start with somebody giving us an order and then trying to execute that order. If we're given an order, we can acknowledge that order exists, which is the define phase of your problem, but we need to take a step back and we need to focus on empathy or understanding our learner population first before we can concur that yes, that's the right problem that we should be trying to solve for or using learning to be solving for. And so for us, our empathy research, also known as qualitative research or understanding our learners, we uncovered that yes, they did really enjoy the product trainers and that we were helping them be product experts. So our data wasn't wrong. But we also uncovered that there was a huge gap that we had. And the gap was the motivation. Our learners were not motivated to learn. They viewed us as a test-taking machine. We're the group in GM that creates training, sends it to them, and they're required to log in and take this training once a month. And they had this resentment towards it because that training took them away from doing their job. They weren't motivated. They didn't understand how it was going to actually help them be better. They found the training to be a little bit boring, especially if it was web-based. They really liked the in-person live training, but they didn't like the web-based training. And it wasn't personalized. We found out that our new hires and our veterans were taking the exact same training. Well, if you've been there for 15, 20 years, you don't need to take the same training as somebody who is a new hire. So with all of this, there was an even bigger aha moment that we uncovered, and that was that they had a need for soft skills, or what I like to refer to as power skills. The art of selling, the art of negotiation, the art of communication, how to listen to their customers. And so again, it validated, yes, that what we were doing was great. They did like the trainers, but there was this big gap of other things around learning engagement. And that is what they really needed, which was those power skills. They really needed to be motivated because they didn't understand why they were taking this, and the relevancy is the word you used earlier, the contextualization of it. But we also realized that it was not putting the learning in that moment of need or the flow of work for them. We were literally taking them off of the sales floor and putting them in a back room away from their customers so they couldn't actually be doing their job. So we needed to figure out how to put that learning, that training in that moment of need in their flow of work so that they have access to it when they want. So it was a really big aha moment for us in general, and that really helped us redefine our strategy, our learning strategy for the next 3 years. And so I share that story for a couple of reasons. As we're talking about learning engagement today and design thinking is a great tool for continuous improvement. It's a great tool for problem finding, not just problem solving. So in this case, we didn't know that a problem actually existed because by looking at our data, we had learning engagement. But what we uncovered was we could have an even stronger engaged audience if we helped solve for them, if we put their needs first. And their needs were contextualization, in the flow of work, that moment of need, put it in my hands, don't take me away from actually doing my job, and help me with skills that I don't have that I need on top of what else you're already providing to me. I know it's a long answer.
It is, but it gives me a good idea. Of course, what you did was, as you said, it was an aha moment because a lot of effort was put into the empathy phase, and that can uncover so many things. And after that, sometimes you are clearer about the solutions you need to create, and some you were creating are not needed. Like you said, some of it can be moved to the moment of need. Possibly it's a short PDF instead of a big training. So you just create solutions which are more appropriate, hence very relevant, and hence in any case engagement will come in because people have decided or asked for those kind of solutions to be provided when they need it, and what kind of solution. I recall once again what I read in a book recently by Julie Dirksen on designing for how we learn. uh, Engagement is usually or sometimes not part of the learning program. It is what the learner brings. So if we can give it closer to the performance,
Hmm.
engagement is much, much higher, because they can clearly see the relevance of it and the immediacy of application of that knowledge or learning.
Absolutely. In fact, you just reminded me sort of another piece of the learning engagement framework, and that's the tools that we use.
Mhm.
And so I'll share with you a quick example at GM of not putting the learner first. And that is that in our industry at learning and development, for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, and I'd say the last 10 years, it's increased very visibly. But that is that technology seems to be the holy grail of solutions for our industry, and everything can be solved by a technology. LXP is the new buzzword. For with LMS, we've got chatbots, we've got just apps, and because we're seeing that so much, I think that we inherently think, well, that must be the solution. That must be, we need to have some sort of technology to help drive our solutions. And I think we have forgotten to focus first on the learner and the culture in which we're operating, or the culture in which our learners are operating. And that is not to say that learning technology isn't a solution. It is a solution, but it is not the solution, and it is not always the solution. And so we have to think about the culture. And so the culture for our learners in the dealerships at General Motors is not technology heavy. And so our learning group, as we're thinking about the business problems to solve, it's always technology we go to first. And so we wanted to create an app to solve one of the business problems. And before our team went down the path of investing the money and the time, we said, look, let's take a step back and let's do a quick prototype. And this was part of our design thinking initiative. And rather than us building out that app and investing $100,000 in 6 months of time, let's find a vendor who has something similar, and let's do a quick prototype with them. It's going to be free or very, very inexpensive. And let's see how our learner population reacts. Let's see if they're actually engaged with it. So we had identified a business problem, and that was virtual feedback and coaching. And I'm a big fan of that. And there is an app that is available in the market. And I love the app. I use it on a personal level with teams outside of GM. So we said, okay, let's try this app. So we brought the app in, and we had a pilot with 100 users, and not one single person, zero people would actually go through and the installation process to download the app, register, create a profile. I had pre-calls with them, and I said, hey, this is an idea that we have to solve your problem. What do you think? Oh, we love it. We're going to do this. Okay, great. So we get up the call. I keep looking to see how many people have downloaded and registered. None. I have another call. Yeah, we're going to do this. Great. None. So what we learned in the end was that these devices that we try to leverage for learning and development and the dealerships, they're their personal devices. So that means that GM doesn't pay for them. They're not reimbursed for them. I buy it. I pay for that monthly contract. Therefore, I am not going to be told what I have to download and register and create a profile for on my personal device. And so as much as we think that learning technology is the solution or apps are the solutions, I share this, that we have to think first of our learners and the culture that they're in. So what we identified was that our dealerships do not have a culture that is an app-based learning culture, because those are their personal devices. And so luckily, this was part of our design thinking initiative, where we prototyped a solution that was free, and we figured this out in a matter of weeks, rather than having had spent 6 months creating this app and then trying to force it until somebody downloads it, only to figure out 8 months later when it fails that, oh, the culture is that that's their device, and we don't have the right to dictate what they do with their device. So the moral of the story there is think about the learners and the learning culture or the culture in which they're in before we start to prescribe or dictate solutions to them that could be intrusive. In this case, the learning experience and engagement was zero because no one would engage with it because it was their own personal device.
True. So what a wonderful story, I mean, of course, not a story, but, case that you mentioned, and it just aligns so perfectly with something that I read or watched over the weekend, which is a LinkedIn Learning course by Amanda Nolan about saying just exactly the same thing. And here it is not about technology not being a solution. A tech first approach is definitely not the solution. So maybe what you were also saying is work on the content strategy. Maybe that is more important than tech. Tech is certainly going to be helpful, but leading into this whole thing with a tech first approach may not be as helpful because then you are force feeding it. So I love that example also because of the prototyping that you did, which is you would still want to call it under the empathy phase where you are kind of understanding, will this work? Is this kind of a solution usable in this setting? Because you're still understanding the users and the environment in which they work and the constraints they would have.
Absolutely. And I think one of the challenges that we have as practitioners is we're always looking for those success stories. And I see a lot of very polished, crisp, clean success stories about, for example, technology and learning technologies. And we assume, well, it worked there. If it worked at IBM, it must work at General Motors. I mean, two big Fortune 500 companies. And that goes back to my earlier point about having a toolkit and understanding the tools that are in your toolkit. But first, recognizing the culture at which you are trying to solve for that problem or identify that problem before you just assume, well, if it works someplace else, it's going to work here. It's like, again, going back to the house example, it's like if I have a nail and a hammer and just going around trying to figure out where can I put this nail and this hammer and not realizing, well, that house is actually already built and it actually doesn't need any nails or hammers, or there's no metal that can be in that house, or I'm out of analogies right now. But the point is that you're right. Technology can work, but that is the tool. That's not the solution.
Yeah. Probably leading in with a solution, trying to find a problem. All right.
Exactly.
Anything else on the design thinking part before we move on to anything other, which can be utilized? So I definitely find that, and which ties in beautifully with not being an order taker, and hence the empathy phase of design thinking is probably the most useful if you're coming out of that mindset, because it allows you to do so much more in terms of understanding your learners' situations and challenges, etc. Other phases of design thinking, how they align with learning engagement. Sorry, I cut you off there.
That's okay. I would say they all align with it. I would look at design thinking as a holistic approach, not necessarily, pulling one phase or the other. So just recapping again, the purpose for design thinking is that it helps us take a step back from the problem that's in front of us, or the order that we've been given, or even just an idea of that continuous improvement aspect. And I don't hear enough use cases of design thinking around continuous improvement. So that's kind of why I'm repeating it here, that it is a great tool for continuous improvement when you don't even know if there's a problem there. So there's problem finding versus problem solving, and design thinking is a great tool for problem finding. And you may go out and conduct empathy research and find that there is no problem, which that's a win as well. So it's sort of a win-win. You go out, you validate or find there is no problem, or you find that there is a challenge or a gap, and then you work to close that gap, to continue driving performance improvements and operational excellence, which at the end of the day, that's our goal, to continue supporting the business and supporting our learners, although the learners are first. In terms of design thinking itself, reiterating that it's a tool that everybody should have in their toolkit. Do think about the culture in which you're trying to use design thinking. And what I mean by that is, if it's not a touchy-feely culture, that's filled with empathy, or empathy is not in the vocabulary of the culture, then just change the different terminology that you're using. And that's part of our modus operandi of being trusted advisors, not order takers, is thinking about the culture in which our learners are operating, or the culture in which the business is operating, and changing the vocabulary to meet them. We want to avoid trying to force our learning and development vocabulary, our science, on other members of our stakeholder group that they don't know what that is. That's not in their vocabulary, their vernacular, and that means more change. So not only are we going to be probably suggesting that there is a type of a learning event that's going to change behaviors, but before we can even get to that, we're trying to use this language that they don't understand, and that's going to create even more of a barrier. So when you are talking with business partners, learners, stakeholders, try and shift to their language a little bit, maybe slowly plant the seeds of the vocabulary that you're using, but definitely recognize when to push and when to just step back and listen. And lastly, I would think in terms of design thinking and with learner engagement, one of the best practices that our team follows is we've created an ongoing space, and it's a virtual space, or it can be physical space, where we meet on a reoccurring basis to have ongoing discussions about business problems within the organization, within our stakeholder groups, changes within the industry, changes within the competitors of our business partners, challenges that our learners might have. We take all of that, and then we look at what are new learning technologies, what are some learning sciences that are out there, what are some new frameworks that we might want to be following, what are some case studies for other people in our industry or even outside of our industry from a learning perspective, and we look to just merge those two. So we have a reoccurring space where we meet to continue the design thinking thought process. And it's a culture shift, it's a mindset shift, because it's taking us, again, back from the problem and thinking about our learners so that we're putting them at the forefront of everything that we do. So a long-winded summary of what I'm sharing is create a space to continue fostering design thinking, continuing to fostering that mindset of putting the learners first, of thinking about their motivation, their context, and staying engaged with them. And that's what I particularly love about design thinking, is it's a framework or a methodology that allows us to stay engaged and connected with our learners. And so at GM, we typically run a design thinking initiative twice a year. And even if it's not a full initiative, we do qualitative research with our learners. We research high-performing individuals so that we can figure out, well, what actually makes them high-performing, and how can we lift and shift, or how can we repackage those skill sets so that we can help those that are underperforming or those who want to increase their performance. We do qualitative research with our business partners, our stakeholders. We also do qualitative research with our customers. So stay connected with your learners, use qualitative research and or design thinking initiatives to problem solve, to problem find with continuous improvement so that we're continuing to drive learning engagement.
Fantastic. So lots to unpack over there. But most importantly, this whole idea of making a space available where you can constantly debate and deliberate on various things that you outline. Is that something that comes after the culture has been set right to some extent? I would imagine there is a little bit of dependency on that.
Good question. I would say that in our case at GM, that space, which we call the Innovation Garage, actually helped to change the culture a bit. So the culture I break down in three capacities. You have your organizational culture, you have your business partner culture, and then you have the culture within your own team.
Yeah.
And hopefully all three are aligned, but more often than not, I find that they're actually not aligned. So for example, the learning development team may have a learning culture that is supported within the team. Your C-suite executive team may support learning, at least on a visible level. But then you have your business partners who may not have a learning culture, or different variations of those three. So for us, the first challenge in that culture is making sure that our own team has a learning culture and understands lifelong learning and staying connected to the industry and understands learning sciences and the pedagogy of learning. And so that space that we created really helped to change and influence the culture within our own team for design thinking. So when I started with the team, I was the only person that had design thinking experience. And so before we can go out and be design thinking practitioners, we've got to change the mindset of our own team. And so we created that space, the Innovation Garage, so that we could almost subliminally continue to plant those seeds within our own team, get them to have experience, get them to have buy-in, and then become champions of the design thinking methodology themselves. Then once they became champions, then we could kind of space out into the organization. Luckily, GM has a design thinking culture outside of the learning group. So we actually use design thinking in product development and solving internal business problems. And so that really helped us connect with our business partners and our learners, because we're all using the same terminology and the vocabulary. That does not often happen. And so it can be a challenge when you're going from bottom up, trying to influence or change the culture. So all that to be said, the answer to your question is, it's varied. If you don't have a culture that embraces that, I still would look to influence your own team and start to build that culture. It is much more challenging going bottom up, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done, because it can be done.
Yeah, of course, it would be a little easier if the senior executives buy in and they are driving the culture and they kind of push the agenda, they show the learning behaviors themselves, etc. It just helps a lot. I can understand it would be difficult to push it bottom up.
And that's where identifying champions comes in. So one of the great things about the empathy research is that it's an opportunity for you to connect with another individual. And it's an opportunity for you to identify people who are champions that support learning and development, support this type of culture, so that you can stay connected with them and help to leverage them later on as influencers. So I think to really help drive that culture, it's important to recognize who your internal influencers, who your internal champions are, so they can also help drive that change.
Fantastic. Okay, apart from design thinking, any other tools or techniques or technologies? I know technology is something we've talked about a little, maybe not the best starting point, but still, once you have the building blocks in place, anything that you can share which you may have used or you think is valuable for driving learning engagement in organizations? Tools, technologies, techniques, whatever you may have used. Of course, we've talked at length about design thinking.
So I'm going to stay sort of in that same realm, but I'm going to take a step up. And that is, design thinking is part of a larger family, the Humancentric Design family. So there's actually 6 tenets in the Humancentric Design family. And then 3 of them specifically focus on learner-centric design. And that is design thinking, which we've talked about, UX, so user experience, and then LX, learner experience. And I think that part of our practitioner's toolkit needs to have all 3 of those in there, so that you're using UX to understand the type of tools that you may be designing or solutions, and then LX to really focus on that learner experience. And that's taking a look at the entire learning ecosystem that our learners and their learning resides in. And I'm not sure that enough focus in the industry has been placed on that ecosystem And the ecosystem isn't just technology. It's broader than technology. It's anything that can touch that learning, starting from the culture that's supporting learning all the way down to the actual technology or places that the inputs and outputs of those learning experiences. And so I think it's really important to have that mapped out, to have a clear picture of all of those touch points, from culture to physical to technology to the understanding the needs and the challenges to manager support, fit that entire ecosystem so that you're able to have that clear picture for you, but also to figure out if there's too much engagement. So we've kind of gone from how do you build learner engagement to then what if we have too much engagement? And by too much engagement, I mean we are either influencing or we are interrupting the learner too much. So I'll give you an example. When one of the organizations I worked with, once we started using chatbots, everybody loved chatbots. And it was all of a sudden the new shiny object. And so then that became sort of the default solution for any type of learning experience was, let's just do a chatbot. So then what happened is the learner is now getting connected to 5 or 6 different chatbots, and their SMS is going off different times throughout the day, and it became very confusing for the learner. And eventually our initiative started to drop significantly learner engagement because they just kept opting out. They didn't know what was going on, how to keep track of it. And so we can try and engage the learner too much. And so that's where I think having the picture of the learning ecosystem and processes in place to support that. So for example, the process we put in place was no one can prescribe a chatbot without going through proper protocols to make sure that at that time there are no other engagements happening with a chatbot. So I know I kind of went all over the place there, but I think the moral of the story is an ecosystem to understand the entire universe of learning for the learners.
I was kind of thinking about that, what would be the process to really manage that? If you found something good which is working, you would want to just, find a better way to leverage it rather than it become a burden very soon because everybody wants to do it. So I was thinking, maybe the line managers are probably, the most important influencers there, because they probably understand the learners most. They know the needs also, usually a little better than others, higher ups. What is it that we need now? So they may be the funnel through which you can do a little bit of control of what's really reaching the learners also. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And one of the solutions that we put in place was to create a playbook. And in that playbook, we have every type of solution that we have tried or that we are aware of. It's almost like an a la carte menu. And then we have a high-level overview of how we've tried it before, whether it's been successful or it hasn't been successful, and then the different ways to go through and request approval to use those types of solutions. So it solves for a couple of things. One, it helps us have this menu of solutions of our toolkit. It tracks our successes, our areas where it didn't work. Because for us, especially at GM, we have this culture where we don't have a fear of failure. And I think that's one of the most important cultures that we can implement, especially in L&D, because we just try it. That's our motto, is just try it. And if it doesn't work, it's still a win, because that's a data point for us to capture, so that when someone else on our team learns, hey, there's this new tool out here, maybe we should try it, we can actually say, oh, well, here's where we've tried it twice before, and it didn't work for these reasons. So if that is the problem that you're trying to solve, this may not be the best tool. Here are some other options for you. And it gives them a very clear picture of where we've tried it, how we've tried to use it, and if it did work. Now with that, we've also seen tools evolve. For example, there was a gamification platform that we used 3 years ago that didn't work to solve the problem. They've since evolved. We've gone back and prototyped it again, and now it's meeting that business problem based on their own evolution. Additionally, what we try to do is keep that dialogue going with the learning technology providers, in the sense of we'll give them that feedback. Hey, here's where the tool didn't work to meet our needs. Can you put this on your next roadmap for another iteration? So we've had a couple of tools that have evolved along with us because of our needs, but also met the needs of other customers as well. So long story short, one of the answers is creating a playbook that tracks all the tools, tracks their uses, successes, non-successes, so that, and then also how to go about requesting to use these different types of tools, so that everybody has the same baseline understanding, awareness, and playbook to work off of.
Hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, I really like that idea of maintaining that playbook and keeping it populated with the reasons why something worked or did not work, because that gives you a very good sense of, whether this will work in a new environment, in a new situation or not. So it's not just a la carte menu. It also has a lot of detailing added to that, and that's where the real value lies.
Correct. And going back again to failure, which for us is not a negative word. Fail, the acronym that we use is FAIL, first attempt in learning. And again, those are the types of things that we track in the playbook is, hey, we tried this and it didn't work. Some could say that is a failure, but that's, again, not a failure. It's a healthy data point that says it didn't solve our business problem.
Correct. Yeah, and I've seen you say that on LinkedIn a few times. Fantastic. Keith, this has been wonderful. One last thing I wanted to know from you, any advice that you would have for business leaders, learning designers, especially, in the context of how can they help support, achieve learning engagement in what they're doing in their organizations?
I think the first is research. So understanding what other people are doing so that you can learn from them. I think that it is part of our responsibility as practitioners to share our knowledge. That's what learning is all about. And knowledge is useless if you don't share it. And I think with that sharing of knowledge means also sharing the failures or the not so pretty side. I see a lot of use cases that are beautifully polished, and I read them, and my ego sort of comes out and is like, wow, that sounds really great. Why doesn't your team ever make anything as beautifully succinct as they've put together? And from my years of experience, I realized that those are sort of polished marketing materials. That's not really how the secret sauce is made. I've worked in a number of Fortune 500 organizations. So that's one of the nice things that comes along with years of experience, is that you then realize that it's messy. Learning strategies, learning culture can be messy because we're driving change, and change is never easy, unfortunately. And so the answer to your question is, I think that we have a responsibility to share the secret sauce of what we go through to get to this beautiful use case and this beautiful outcome, so that others can learn from it. I think that we need to continuously stay connected to each other in the industry. And that means either communities of excellence or different organizations like ATD or CLO or training industry are very valuable. And I think the third is I'm very concerned about the amount of selling that's happening in our organization and the lack of transparency. And what I mean by that is I see a lot of influencers on LinkedIn pushing learning technologies, and learning technologies continuously are growing to be this holy grail of problem solving for us. And it's a tool for us in our toolkit. But I'm not seeing enough transparency around the people that are pushing these products And I think as I've started to dig in a little bit, I'll find that either someone is an investor in that product, someone is getting kickback, someone actually works for that company, but isn't, on their LinkedIn profile or whatnot. And I think that we just need to be a little bit more transparent as an industry, because at the end of the day, everything that we do is for our learners. And we get caught up in, I think, selling a solution or selling an idea that's going to solve a problem when it's actually not going to solve the problem. It's continuing to put a Band-Aid. We've been Band-Aiding for years since LMSs, and now all other tools are out there as well. So we just have to be very conscious that these are tools and that people are selling because that is their job. And so we have to be able to delineate between practitioners and salespeople selling an idea or a solution.
Very interesting. Well, first of all, from the points that you mentioned, one thing that you are doing today is sharing your successes and a few failures as well. And of course, this will go to a larger set of audience. So, thank you for doing that. But coming to the point of, influencers pushing certain products because of their own personal agendas, and also linking it with what we earlier spoke of, technology being the focus for a lot of people. Maybe there is a, reason that technology is a little more tangible. The outcome is learning, which is something that we don't know how to measure. We find it very difficult to measure. So technology is one that is possibly helping you do the initial bit a little better, and hence it's easier sell, easier convincing in the organization, etc. So everybody is really kind of focusing on that, but the content strategy kind of takes a back seat in all of this. What do you think about that?
Agree. I agree. So the technology tools are tangible. It is easier to digest than to talk about learning sciences, behavioral sciences, learning engagement, culture, strategy. Those are all the hard things. The learning technology tool is the easier piece. But if you don't have those others, if you don't have a thorough understanding of those, if you don't have a learning culture, if you don't have a strategy in place, if you don't have change management culture or change management strategy for these technology tools, they're not going to be successful. And so that's the same message that I keep hearing over and over again, is we're almost repeating the challenges that we had with LMSs now with other technology tools, because we haven't fixed the actual foundation or structural issue, and that is that we're not focusing enough on what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve for with this technology tool. What's the culture in which we're trying to implement this tool? What is the culture for our learners themselves? Maybe technology tools are simply not going to work because of that culture. Like the GM example I gave, these are their devices. Technology on their devices that we mandate is not going to be successful. So without those other pieces, that learning technology tool is not going to be successful. And I'm not seeing enough of that type of advocacy. It's more of, here's a tool, it's worked in these 4 Fortune 500 companies, so it's going to work for you. Not necessarily, and not without a foundational understanding of these other aspects. And that's on us as learning and development practitioners. And I think one of the bigger challenges that I see in the industry is that there's not a lot of rigor for people who can say they're in learning and development. We have a lot of power in this industry to influence lives, to change lives, to make make the lives of our talent better, increase performance across organizations. And so I think that we have more due diligence that needs to be done to those who are saying they're in L&D than just allowing anybody to simply add that to their resume or to their CV without doing the diligence of understanding the history of learning sciences, of Piaget, of Ebbinghaus, of behavior styles. I don't want to continue ranting.
I mean, there's just too many of them, and we've discussed it earlier about a few books that really capture it so well. But yeah, I mean, it's surprising that people who have been, in the industry for very long also, oh yeah, there you go. I'm sure it has got a lot of sticky notes and notes all around. Mine is full of.
It does.
Yeah, and there are many more, but yeah, but you're right. Maybe L&D needs to develop that rigor a little more. But on a positive note, I do see there is uh, a little movement. More and more people are interested in at least talking, listening about these things, which hopefully is going to bring a positive change in times to come.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely believe in our industry. And if you look at the history of the last 20 years, we're continuing on an upward trajectory, which is great. But going back to my earlier point about continuous improvement, which I believe can work in every aspect of our life, our industry also could continuously improve.
Yeah, it is. It is
And
improving.
it is.
Even though,
And it is. And it's like you are a very strong advocate, practitioner, and I know you're trying to drive that change as well. So thank you for that.
my pleasure. We're trying to do our bit, and with your help, of course, people like you who are supporting us. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation, Keith. So many things that I learned from this, and I'm sure our audience is going to enjoy it equally. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Speak soon.